last October in the New York Times, there was an article from a cardiologist. And he recently made a house call, probably first time in his medical career. So I'm going to skip to the second bullet. His name was Mr. Jarwar. I'm probably killing that pronunciation, but it was a very good article, and the National Center for Healthy Housing put it up on their website, and they thought it, they picked on it a little bit, but it was a good article. So the second part of that second bullet says, but I believe if we revive the house call, the overall savings to the healthcare system, not to mention the impact on patient care, would be enormous. This is a cardiologist saying this. He continues, I've made an occasional house call, and what I've learned about my patients has been invaluable. The key to improving the hospital-to-home transition is a better understanding of the home component. Now, the NCHH further commented on and stated, improvement in resident health on a national scale is possible, but only if we take steps to both medically treat people and intervene in their homes. So that's a really powerful statement in the New York op-ed section, and hopefully a lot of people took a look at that and heeded the advice. Before we go further, we need to talk about how we're going to evaluate some of the further questions. And just like the movement of the allopathic medical institution to the more integrative medical side of it, so goes this indoor health industry. And so let's take a look at what moving to a systems paradigm in this business means. Attempts to illustrate that events are separated by distance and time, and that small catalytic events can cause large changes in complex systems like people or buildings. Continuing, the systems thinking concerns an understanding of a system by examining the linkages and interactions between elements that comprise the entirety of that system. And that's exactly what we're trying to communicate here. All the different interactions in the components of a building and how it impacts the health of it. So we'll see that. It's important to note that the systems thinking is in contrast to Cartesianism, and so which essentially says nothing. A system is nothing but the sum of its parts, and that I'm sure most of you are familiar with the medical industry moving to that side. So we took a look at 4 primary questions: what, when, why, and who about the indoor health issues. There's a couple questions that haven't been discussed yet: where and how. And that's the next section. This book is an outstanding topic. This gentleman here, he, from what I understand, is one of the very few people in the world that studies buildings and their change over time. That's what he does, and how the different components change at different rates over time. This building is outstanding. I think I underlined every line in this book. This book. So what I wanted to do here is start this concept as to where does decay and change occur, and how can we adapt to improve indoor health. So taking a lot of the information and concepts from this brilliant book called How Buildings Learn by Stuart Brand, we're going to dive into that. This is a great icon that really discusses what he's trying to say. The different layers of change here, they change at different rates, and that's the crux of what he's trying to say. He says, because of the different rates of change of its components, a building is always tearing itself apart. So he adapted from a previous gentleman in the same industry, but he primarily provides 6 and extrapolated 7 primary components of the building and how they relate to each other. So there's stuff, the space plan, the services, the skin, the structure, the site, and the souls of a building. And when you put those together and they start changing and influencing one another, a lot of chaos can occur. So let's take the first one, site. Site is eternal. The geographic setting, the slope, the soil, the urban location, whose boundaries and context outlast generations of buildings. I think that's why I highlighted it on the bottom there. There's 7 of these, so I'm going to move along. The skin, the shell, also called the shell, is the envelope or exterior surfaces, which is now often changed every 20 years or so to keep up with fashion or technology. The shell is highly related to and stressed by vapor drive potential, energy efficiency, and weather extremes. Structure, it's the foundation and the load-bearing elements, which are perilous and expensive to change. So generally, we don't do too much with the structure very often if we can avoid it. So, with these weather extremes going on now, tornadoes and floods, some of this is happening outside of our control. Services. The services are the working guts and moving parts of a building, such as mechanical systems, elevators, plumbing, wiring. Some of these parts wear out pretty quickly, as early as 7 to 15 years. Space. The space plan. The layout between the interior walls, the ceilings, the floors, the fenestrations. Turbulent commercial space can change every 3 years, while a home, quiet home, may wait 30 years to change. And I consider the space plan the attic and the crawl spaces as well. And then the stuff. There's a lot of stuff in some of these houses. Some of the basements, that door that's closed that nobody ever goes in. The stuff of the furniture, the contents, the furnishings, the clothes, the clutter. Abundance can easily inhibit cleaning and restrict airflow, as well as create living space for pests. So the last one, souls. How do the occupants who are servants to their stuff, the manipulators of services, the souls who come and go, everybody's got their different agenda in their homes or their structures. How do they influence all the other components? So I want to continue with Mr. Brand's discussion because it's pretty important to discuss those topics. The dynamics of the system will be dominated by the slow components, with the rapid components simply following along. So the slow ones constrain the quick. The site dominates the structure, which dominates the skin, which dominates the surfaces, which dominate the space plan, which dominates the stuff. And finally, the souls, which dominate the stuff, depending on your relationship with money. But how this influence, that linear influence, can percolate backwards for each component as well. So this is my one of my staff here recently in a condominium, and it's a fairly large condominium that's needs a little bit of help. And at the top there, I said site change is caused by services decay and neglect. And here, the plumbing, the condensate was draining into the crawl space, causing a lot of humidity to the dirt floor, and eventually that grew mold on the wooden structure in there. Some of it was masonry and terracotta, but there was asbestos, there was mold, there was odors, there was rodents, and these contaminants have the notable potential to go up through the skin and impact even the attic part of it. So in this case, we had structure failure, services, the stress on services. The shell is suspect. We didn't do a full investigation on this yet, but the stuff in the space are impacted. So there's definitely some serious issues going on here. And as you can see, investigators, even the guys doing the work to clean up, they need to be properly protected. That's how you protect yourself. Full face respirator, Tyvek boots, gloves, and I was crawling through asbestos. It was deeper than I've ever been in asbestos before. Okay, so let's take some of these things, shake them up, and instead of take them as concepts now, all right? And then as we continue, remember the questions: where does decay and change occur, and how can we adapt to improve the indoor health? So I put them into a diagram, Venn diagram here, because they're going to be kind of blown apart when we go to the next one to communicate it. Now, that diagram here, this center one, is this center part here for all intensive purposes. All right, now the National Healthy Housing Organization I mentioned previously, they are promoting 7 principles of a healthy home. All right, and it's good. They're good principles. They're for all kinds of different economic levels of homes, for rented properties, but they work. However, they're fairly simplistic on purpose. But if you're to really get into some of the deeper questions as to the interrelated aspects of why it happens, when it happens, and maybe some conflict between the different stakeholders or an insurance claim versus pre-existing issues, you got to go a little deeper than their 7 principles. And I think that's where the answer could be explained, or at least investigated, using these layers of change of components of a building by applying them to the 7 principles of a healthy home. And let's explore that, how we can gain some value out of that. Keep it dry. All right. So how do the components affect the dryness, the humidity, the moisture of a home? Varying cultures have different expectations for climate and cleanliness. So you have to understand, when we're going into different rental units or even homes, some people like it 80 plus degrees in the house and 90, 100% humidity. They don't turn the air conditioning on, and they don't know why. That's what they grew up with. And next thing you know, there's mold and their kids are sick, and nobody can figure out why, and nobody asks, well, what's your temperature, what's your humidity that you like to have at home? And they came from that type of environment somewhere else in the world, and it goes on for years and nobody asks these questions. So in this case, I consider that souls. So they have a direct impact on whether or not it's dry in that house because of what they're used to. So 3 moisture types, let's look at that. And this is very simplified, but flooding. Obviously, everybody every now and then has a flood in their house, major flooding from outside, like the Midwest is experiencing now, or even the West Coast. And then, or a pipe leak. Also, bound moisture content of drywall, of wood, and then humidity, free moisture, the humidity in the air. So 3 different types of moisture need to be considered when you're discussing such issues. Then health, as I said earlier, dehydration during the very dry times. The house can become very dehydrated, as well as the occupants in the house. Chronic, acute, cumulative, and synergistic health impact as well. It's not always just reaction to pollen or other aspects, but different cumulative and synergistic things can occur when there's too much humidity in the air and whatnot, typically from microbial related issues. So restricting access to the moisture, understanding where dust mites and mold and bacteria and pests and spiders can hang out is important. How do you detect this information? This picture here is a data logger. It's a fairly new one from Hobo Data Logger. They're great. They're very affordable, and they can provide a lot of insight to what's going on in that structure and whether or not the humidity is going up and down during different seasons or days or weeks along that line. So one that's hidden there, daily awareness of the humidity on each floor. That's the space, understanding your space. By the way, the data logger is understanding the surfaces, how the services interact with keeping humidity in check. And then understanding the space, the humidity of the space. Continuing on with keeping it dry. So stormwater drainage, looking on the outside of a structure, the shell, the site, It all starts with the roof. Keeping the house dry starts with the roof and the gutters and the drainage and the slope. Can you control that? Is your landscape set up to control that? Do you have, does your snow melt? Does your storm water drain away from your foundation or not? Is it neutral? Is it negative, which is not good? It needs to be a positive slope away from the foundation. So the next one categorized under services is discussing the humidistats and humidity control appliances. Are they working? Are they maintained? Are they clean? So here, these are just little portable ones. I'm sure we all have these at least at one point in our homes. But usually they're built into a central air system. And so are all the rooms have proper circulation? That's the space. Thinking about, is the space dry? Closets, especially, we find a lot of mold on closets that have contents, the stuff in them, and then the wall is plaster. So so you get micro condensation on that wall if you don't have proper circulation in that closet. So that's real important. We find this especially in basements, under stairwells, and in rooms that are not used. They just close off the vents, and not good. Not good. You need to have some circulation, even if it's just a general fan going, presumingly that the basement is clean to start with. If not, clean it up, then create the circulation. So next one is moisture loss through the skin. As I said, it leads you to infection potential, irritation. And then let's talk about humidity. We get a lot of questions. What humidity should it be? Well, it depends on what season it is. If you're in the cooling season, the summer, ideally keep it below 55% humidity. And not on your first floor, but in your basement as well. So in the heating season, you want to keep it 30 to 40%. I mean, you're not going to, if it's real cold, you're not going to likely get it up much higher than that if it's super cold. So if you can keep it above 30, that'd be great. If you keep it in 40, 45, that's good. But watch when the temperature drops, because then you'll get condensation on the windows, and that can cause other problems.